Considering the upcoming self-titled release with a posthumous album of Sophie, I want to make a full video in regards to what I consider to be one of my favorite albums of all time. Oil of Every Pearls and Insights is considered the debut album of Sophie if you count out the release of Product and just consider it a compilation with a collection of singles that she would release at this period of time. Now, I have mentioned Oil of Every Pearls and Insights on my channel twice. The first time was back in January 2019, in the very early days of my channel, having it in my top albums of 2018, and then in early 2020 mentioning it in my video with the best albums of the decade. In both of those videos, I praised the album for its production and how it sounds ahead of its time, but I was a bit harsh with my placement because nowadays, this would easily be in my top 10 for best of the decade, and it has easily become one of the biggest growers that I can think of in recent memory. And I don't necessarily believe that it has to do with Sophie's passing from a tragic accident, although you can say that it creates sort of a different impact, especially in the more emotionally driven moments, such as with tracks like It's Okay to Cry. Sophie's mark in the music industry has been significant, and you could see the impact of her death from the works of other artists, most notable being this year's track So I out of the album Brad by Charli XCX, and also an entire album dedicated to Sophie made by her partner at the time, Evita Manche, which I made a review of it back when it dropped. Even for me, when I think about it, I can't think of another death by an artist in recent memory that has shocked me as much as the one from Sophie. She was such a young person that passed away so suddenly. Her contributions were empowering, and it's sad to see such a talented individual pass away so quickly in such a way. Sophie started making rounds with singles such as Beep, Lemonade, Viz, and others, all of them appearing in the album Product, which had this great futuristic feel of bubblegum bass and some very interesting sounds and vocal manipulations. Then we saw recognition as a member of PC Music that paved the path for this more bubblegum bass sound becoming popular in the mid-2010s, and also production credits for the track Pizza in Madonna by Madonna, Big Fish Theory by Vince Staples, and most importantly, the revolutionary EP by Charli XCX, Vroom Vroom, a release that felt extremely refreshing for its time and in a sense contributed significantly in the rise of hyperpop and more futuristic and out there sounds in pop music. But even with this massive wave of artists making their own takes on hyperpop and bubblegum bass and Deconstructed club, Sophie was still managing to do something unique and stand out in the test of time, especially with the release of Oil of Every Pearls and Insights, an album that was more personal, an expression of self in a period where Sophie came out as trans, and with a video clip of It's Okay to Cry, revealing herself and representing this new era not only with the music but also with its themes and being filled with personality. Something that initially I thought it was really interesting but probably didn't give it the appreciation that it deserves. Like I said in the videos back in the day where I would share my thoughts with this album, is that one of the greatest elements about this album is its production, and those statements stand true to this day. Even after almost 6 years, this album still sounds fresh. It's still impressive with its sound design and its textures, and especially when it comes to modern releases, this is undoubtedly one of the greatest albums I've ever heard in terms of sound and production. Like, this goes beyond anything else Sophie did before, and even in regards to other artists in the field from her close circle, no one else has managed to create an album that sounds like this. Like, how do you even come up with the sounds? This is beyond impressive. And it makes it even more impressive that basically all of the sounds that she used are not sampling or recordings, they were made from scratch, which is insane to think about, but also makes sense, since the album has so many sounds and textures where I wouldn't recall listening to anything like this beforehand. And especially after the release of insane tracks, such as Ponyboy and Face Shopping, there was this huge wave of artists out of this hyperpop sphere that would constantly use this iconic and unique snare sound, to the point where some people may even become sort of irritated by how much it was overused. It would be known as the Sophie snare, like it had its own signature sound. And I get it why it would be used to this extent, like it gives a strong character. It's a special kind of sound that it's oddly pleasing for how mechanical it sounds. But apart from the more banging moments that definitely created a very strong impression, a big portion of this album actually goes into ambient territory, having a big emphasis on atmosphere and creating soundscapes that might sound dreamy and dark/haunting at the same time. Even if these tracks might not create as much of a strong impression in comparison to the more in-your-face and catchier tunes, they are still really impressive in terms of their sound design, making for some of the most intriguing ambient pieces in recent memory, something that is going to be discussed with a little bit more detail when we go track to track. One of the things I had a bit of a criticism for this album back then, something that I've also seen other people mention as well, is that it felt like there was no cohesion between the tracks, that it was inconsistent and the pacing was not all that great. But listening to this album again and again, I can't imagine it with the same set of tracks working better any other way. I actually really like how it jumps from one dynamic track to something very ethereal. It always has this element of surprise going on to it, and there are actually some very interesting transition points that lead from one song to the next, even if we're talking about a radical mood shift. Realizing how well these tracks work together the way they do gave me an even deeper appreciation for what this album was going for with the way it was paced, and also with certain tracks I was like, okay, I actually like this a lot more, like I can constantly remember about it and how many impressive things it achieves. All of those lead to All of Every Pearls and Insights to become one of the most captivating experiences I can think of in recent memory, and this has become one of the vinyl records in my collection I cherish the most. I can't believe I actually ended up finding a copy out of this album. A few years ago I didn't think it was even possible. And while it is one of the most prized records in my collection, at least it's really worth it. The packaging is really good and the vinyl sounds awesome, which is nice to see considering how rich of a sound this album has. So the album starts on a really strong note with the powerful and ethereal It's Okay to Cry, the first single out of the album that instantly felt completely different in comparison to anything else Sophie did before, due to how intimate this track is. There are many interesting aspects about the song, from its subtle piano to massive layers of ambience, especially in the more powerful chorus, and also the vocals are quite special. They are really close, like you can feel the pops and it's like kind of ASMR, but not to the point where it might become irritating. The vocals still sound so clean, and simultaneously they build so much space with some of the best reverb I think I've ever heard, especially towards the end of the song. Like it sounds absolutely phenomenal. And after such a beautiful and subtle tone for almost its entirety, at the end it hits you with this explosion of instrumentation, amazing synth layers, and such passionate vocals. This is a nice surprise to get in the last couple of seconds, this more dynamic part, but it's nothing compared to the 180 the album does with the next track and single, Pony Boy. Completely different from its themes and instrumentation, I'd say that in a sense, It's Okay to Cry kinda prepares you for something like that to happen, because the last seconds have this darker tone that comes out of nowhere, and so I actually think it makes for a great segue to the next track. So Pony Boy is an insane song, with more of like an industrial mood and also very kinky. The bass is gnarly, all of the percussion and beats go crazy, there are sounds of whips, glitch manipulations, and then you have the insane vocal ranges that go from the playful delivery of Pony Boy to verses with a really deep mechanical voice that has a really dominant tone, sort of like giving you orders. The track seems to follow a formula with the beat being this straightforward non-stop hitting banger, but then the second half creates some extraordinary pacing with the inclusion of melodic synths, and after that a rising haunting tone that lurks throughout the instrumental, and so it becomes this back and forth of conflicting emotions. Also you get those crazy ranges of singing vocals that just add great to the overall insanity of the song and its creativity. The sinister and brutal sounds follow up to an even greater extent with the absolutely astonishing face swapping, which by itself, as a production perspective, I believe that every producer should take notes from this song. It is that much mind-blowing. Like, to this day, I cannot believe how a track can sound so highly detailed, have so many amazing layers and textures to it, and just be so dynamic, energetic, and refreshing with its sound choices. The beat over here once again sounds absolutely mental. Give the impression like you're hitting punch or something, and it's just so highly detailed and clean sounds. The bass has this spectacular use of distortion, it sounds nasty as fuck, and once again the vocals can reach this deep mechanical robotic tone. They are so bizarre that they blend amazingly with the rest of the instrumental, to the point where I didn't even realize there were lyrics and vocals in these parts at first. And then you have this nightmarish chorus with an impressive vocal range and lots of insane sounds. It has some of the best works I've heard done with cutting the highs and feeling distant, and while the pacing is what you would expect, more than halfway through we get this surprising curveball with this beautiful ethereal atmosphere and vocals that comes out of nowhere. At first it felt a bit like a throw-off, like I couldn't really get this stylistic choice. It didn't make much sense to me, but the more I would listen to it, I didn't mind it. It's a gorgeous part, and it returns nicely back to what the track was doing at the beginning, with some nice glitch manipulation serving as a transitional point. Lyrically also very interesting with its themes and its commentary on media and consumerism. Absolutely phenomenal song from start to finish. One of the greatest I can think of from the past decade, without a doubt. After the 3-track singles playing back to back and being excellent, the question is how the album can be able to keep up, and it keeps up tremendously with the track Is It Cold in the Water. Another more emotional moment out of the album, with more emphasis on atmosphere, with scenes that at first gave me an impression of like old school industrial sounds that you would find in genres like EBM and agrotech, but here those sounds have more clarity, have something to their sound design that makes them stand out, and the layers as it progresses become more and more spectacular. It starts muffled, doesn't like being in the background, and then the space opens, it becomes more dynamic, more fulfilling and overwhelming, and leads to an absolutely gorgeous chorus with an astonishing vocal performance. It's filled with emotion, passion, and while it's the most minimal moment so far with the least amount of change-ups, it still holds strong on being such a powerful and captivating moment in the album. With the track Infatuation is where the album, in my opinion, has the first moment that feels weaker in comparison to the amazing beginning it had, and I mean that beginning is the first 4 out of the 9 tracks, but still, it's not like we see a downgrade in quality though. I mean, once again, when it comes to sound and production, this track also nails those parts. The vocals once again go places, but I'd say they're not as standout this time around, outside the I Wanna Know part, but some of the more high-pitched parts don't sound particularly impressive to me. The way it progresses by starting in a calm tone and then becoming more and more grand and spacey makes once again for a great blend of sounds. There are some pretty nice ideas, but I'd say that this is the first moment over here that doesn't feel as fully developed. Which leads to the very next moment, the track Not Okay, one that is quite short, and at first I was hoping that it would go even further. It feels more of like an experimentation rather than a fully fleshed out song, and there's probably a lot of you that have heard this album that might consider this the only underdeveloped track out of the album, but the more I listen to it, I just can't get this out of my head, just how mind-blowing it is with its sounds. Like, this is one of the most insane sounding tracks in the project, and I really like how basically every part and every sound constantly evolves with a new range of effects. Throughout its less than 2-minute runtime, it will make sure that all of the sounds will have something new going on to them with each new bit, from its absolutely filthy distorted bass to its catchy synths and brilliant vocal chops and loops. It's an absolute banger, and even in its short runtime, it makes a lot of change-ups to justify its length and still be an engaging song. The track Pretending is a slow burner. It's the most ambient-centered work in the album, and it has a really slow pacing. It's constantly building up and introducing new layers and sounds. And don't get me wrong, the build-up ends up sounding absolutely captivating, but until we reach that point, it makes probably for the least impressive part out of the whole album, not leaving room for that much to talk about. At least the ending sounds absolutely sinister with the way the whole track feels like it glitches out, and after such a dark undertone, transitions to what is arguably the most cheerful track in the album. Immaterial makes total sense to be the most well-known track in the album, and it's kinda surprising that this wasn't a single. This is the track that goes the closest to the sound that we got with Product, and also the closest to the sound of Bubblegum bass. In this sense, it feels like the least original moment over here, since it doesn't go for the totally different vibe and aesthetic that we got with pretty much the rest of the album. And at first I was slightly indifferent with this song, not that I didn't like it, but some of the auto-tuned vocals over here felt a bit over the top, not my cup of tea. The instrumentation for the most part felt really simplistic, but who was I kidding? This is such an addictive and infectious song. It's beautiful, it sounds awesome, and it's also probably the best moment lyrically. A nice reflection over her transitioning period, an acceptance and appreciation of self, and looking forward to the future. A track that I can imagine being very empowering and encouraging for anyone who wants to transition or accept themselves for who they are. I really like the sentiment of this song, and it is like an LGBTQ anthem, that's for sure. Once again, the transitioning point has this more sinister tone to it in order to lead to another aggressive, hard-hitting banger. The two-part Whole New World and Pretend World already shares familiar elements, but that doesn't stop it from being a spectacular moment. I'd say the vocals steal the show on this one. The Whole New World line is infectious, the chorus sounds awesome, and you have those absolutely demented robotic growling vocals. It's like an industrialized version of death metal growls. I've never heard anything in terms of vocals that sounds remotely close to this. I'm really curious what type of effects could lead to such a result. After a straightforward approach on the first half with an incredible set of sounds, the track transitions to its second part, Pretend World, which builds the same type of atmosphere just like with Pretending, except this time everything sounds more captivating with its moody tone tying to such a noisy set of sounds filled with reverb. It's so spacey, it makes you get lost in its void. And once again it ends with a series of sound effects that have this creepy aesthetic and give you the impression that something else is coming. Because this is the way lots of those tracks will transition one from another. It's like it's giving you a message that there is more to come in the future, that it's not over yet. I think that Sophie's legacy will carry on for a really long time. It's something that we already see being the case, but hopefully her vision and influence is something that we'll see grow even stronger as time goes on. I hope that the posthumous album being arranged by her brother is going to get the proper treatment it deserves. I'm really looking forward to this, and I'm just astonished by how creative Sophie was and how her creativity carried on with some of the greatest displays of pop and electronic music in recent years, in my opinion. It started with Product, and it got more personal, more sentimental, and more impactful with all of Every Pearls and Insights. And that's why I consider this album to be an essential. Let me know your thoughts of this album down in the comments. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.